I have a superpower that allows me to see the infidelity rate above everyone's head. When the infidelity rate reaches 100%, the number that appears afterward indicates the number of times they've been unfaithful. After being very selective, I finally found a beautiful and virtuous wife with an infidelity rate of 0. I can see the infidelity rate above everyone's head. Once it reaches 100, the number that follows indicates the count of infidelities. I was cautious and selective, carefully choosing, until I finally found a beautiful and virtuous wife with an infidelity rate of 0. But one day, I suddenly noticed her infidelity rate skyrocketing. Faced with a wife on the verge of infidelity, what would you do? Buy poison or a gun? Around the time I was in junior high, I could see a string of vivid numbers above everyone's head. It wasn't until the day my parents argued and divorced that I learned those numbers represented the rate of infidelity. Once the infidelity rate hits 100, the following numbers show the count of infidelities. With the lesson of my parents before me, I swore to find a beautiful and virtuous wife with a very low rate of divorce above her head. Though it was difficult, fortune favors the persistent, and in college, I truly found her. Moreover, her infidelity rate was infinitely close to 0. Her name is Mary, 2 years older than me, very beautiful and pure. Her family's conditions were not very good, living with her younger brother and mother, dependent on each other. Her father was a gambler who ran away and left them with a debt of over $100,000. But that was not a problem. Over the years, with my ability to see infidelity rates, I've secretly made a fair amount of money. Women with an infidelity rate close to 0 are extremely rare. To avoid my parents' fate, I had to hold on tightly. I pursued her madly, even paying off her debts. After we got married, it was indeed so. She was very capable and virtuous, always very gentle with me. Since my parents' divorce, I once again felt the happiness of a home. However, about a week ago, the infidelity rate above my gentle and virtuous wife's head jumped from 0.08% to 43% overnight. At first, I didn't take it too seriously, because sometimes short videos of attractive men and women can affect this number to some extent. Like my good buddy, even after getting married, his infidelity rate would fluctuate a little, usually between 30% and 50% when he scrolled through videos or photos of beautiful women, but gradually, I felt something was wrong, because the number above my wife's head was steadily increasing every day. In just 5 days, it went from 43% to 83%. This meant that with only 17% more, she would be unfaithful. Now, I couldn't sit still. I couldn't help thinking about these days, how she would sneak around in the middle of the night, making calls and sending messages to someone else. She said it was her best friend, putting on a calm facade, hiding her panic. With the first impression of an infidelity rate close to 0, I naively thought she was discussing some embarrassing topics with her best friend. But now it seems more likely she's chatting with some other man. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. All these years, through thick and thin. At just 25 years old, I became the financial director of a finance company, a future filled with limitless potential. Not only did I buy a car and a house, but I also funded the renovation of her family's house back home. I treated her as well as I possibly could. I simply cannot understand what kind of man could have bewitched her so, to the point of contemplating betrayal of our marriage. After much thought, I decided to observe a little longer. After all, I have deep feelings for my wife. As long as her infidelity rate doesn't exceed 100%, I am willing to give her another chance. When I came home from work on Friday, Mary's complexion alternated between flushed and troubled, restless, completely lacking her usual dignified and gentle demeanor. Even when I came home, her expression was like that of a thief, her face full of worries. I looked up and saw her infidelity rate had jumped from 83% to 96%, glowing a glaring red. On the surface, I remained calm, but inside, I felt a chill. I knew she was just one opportunity away from infidelity, a tinderbox awaiting a spark. Faced with a wife on the verge of infidelity, what would you do? Buy poison or a gun? After dinner was prepared, Mary held her bowl, eating in small bites, but it was clear her mind wasn't on the food. I kept my composure and jokingly said, "Dear, when I came home just now, you were neither sitting nor standing, just like a mouse caught by a cat." Have you been doing something behind my back? Something you're sorry for?" Hearing this, I saw her body shake violently, nearly dropping her bowl. Clearly, she was startled, because her mind was filled with thoughts of that man. Feeling guilty, she stammered, trying to maintain composure. "What are you talking about, honey? You've been getting more and more unreasonable, making such jokes with me." She even gave me a reproachful glare, but her trembling hands revealed her inner unrest. "Just a joke. Why such a big reaction?" I laughed, then deliberately told her a story. "By the way, dear, today a friend told me he had a female employee, originally very well-behaved and virtuous. But unexpectedly, she was unfaithful. Her husband, furious, rushed to the company with a knife and slashed her over a dozen times. Blood was everywhere. Although the woman's life was saved, not only was her face completely disfigured, she became disabled for life and could no longer become a mother. Just because of infidelity, that woman paid such a heavy price. It's really not worth it. I wonder if that woman, sitting in a wheelchair for the rest of her life, will regret her moment of impulse." After hearing the story, her face instantly turned deathly pale, and she dropped her bowl on the floor. The infidelity rate above her head was also wildly fluctuating. 96%, 63%, 22%. I pretended to be concerned and asked, "Dear, what's wrong? Did that story scare you?" She was in panic, barely daring to look at my face, and stuttered, "Yes, that story is really scary. But why did you suddenly tell me such a frightening thing?" She looked up at me, trying to gauge from my expression if I had discovered anything. I laughed and said, "We always talk about romantic things. Why not change it up with something thrilling? Are you overthinking it?" Mary, still in a state of confusion, replied, "Overthinking? I just didn't react at the moment." Then she quickly finished her meal and went back to her room. I picked up a piece of vegetable with a cold smile. I told this story to shake her up as a final warning. After all, I still have deep feelings for her. If there's a chance to save our relationship, it's worth trying. But if she persists in her ways, she can't blame me. At least I've done all I could. Over the next few days, Mary indeed behaved more cautiously and was as gentle and virtuous to me as before. Perhaps she was truly frightened by my bloody story. However, all the affection vanished in an instant due to a series of outrageous acts by my mother-in-law. That afternoon, Mary called me, "Honey, you'll need to order takeout tonight. I'm going to visit my mom." Going back to her mother's place, I wondered, "Is there something wrong at your mom's? Do you want me to come with you?" "It's okay. There's nothing wrong. I'm just going to see my mom. Plus, you have work to do. There's no need for you to accompany me." Although I indeed had things to attend to at the company and couldn't leave, I thought about picking her up after work. After work, I drove straight to my mother-in-law's house. It took over 2 hours to get there. When my mother-in-law saw me, she frowned and said disdainfully, "Why have you come?" I was used to her attitude by now. Although it was uncomfortable, I endured it and said, "Mary was in such a hurry to come back. I was worried something had happened, so I rushed over to see if I could help. By the way, isn't Mary back? Where is she?" Knowing my mother-in-law's temperament, I spoke quickly and directly, not wanting to get entangled in a pointless argument. She seemed very impatient and said directly, "She has already gone back home. I just sprained my ankle. It's nothing serious. Why did you even come? And you came to your mother-in-law's house without even bringing a gift. What kind of son-in-law does that? Also, I've hurt my ankle. Send me 2,000 so I can buy some supplements." This infuriated me. Every time I came to my mother-in-law's house, she found reasons to ask for money, from 1,000 to tens of thousands, always so righteous. This felt like robbery. Who would willingly endure this? It seems that the years of wholehearted kindness have made you arrogant, haven't you? Do you think that because I married your daughter, I'm at your mercy? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got, but there was nothing I could do. In the end, I still gave in. If I didn't give her the money, would she let me leave? It would make me very uncomfortable and waste my time. After receiving the money, my mother-in-law was all smiles but didn't even glance at me, directly entering the house and closing the door, her step lively, not at all like someone who had sprained her ankle. Seeing this scene, my expression gradually turned cold. Clearly, there was no sprained ankle. What exactly were she and her daughter up to? With these doubts, I drove back home. By the time I arrived, it was already past 11 p.m. Opening the door, I found Mary lying in bed, sound asleep, with a sweet, happy smile on her face, though her brows hinted at fatigue. I looked up at the numbers above her head, and my pupils suddenly contracted. The percentage above her head had turned into a solid number, 4. The single digit no longer represented the infidelity rate, but the number of times she had been unfaithful in one night. 4 times. I had thought that choosing a wife with a low infidelity rate would prevent such incidents, but it seems that what is bound to happen will still happen. A momentary infidelity rate does not predict future behavior. Moreover, I have a feeling that this time, she must have colluded with her mother, tricking me into going back to her mother's house, merely as a cover for her to carry out her affair. She thought she was flawless, not realizing that the numbers above her head had already betrayed her. Mary, since you've done something to betray me, don't blame me for being ruthless afterward. I went about my days as if nothing happened, working as usual, and treating Mary with the same affection at home. Mary also acted as if nothing was wrong, showing no sign of guilt. In fact, she was already struggling to restrain herself because beside the bright red number 4 above her head, a new percentage had appeared, 99%. This meant she intended to be unfaithful again, not just once, and possibly tonight. No man can tolerate his wife's betrayal, and I am no exception. But this time, I didn't intervene. Being cuckolded for the first time was due to my negligence and being outmaneuvered, something I couldn't prevent. Being cuckolded again was to obtain a result. I had already hired a private detective to investigate for me, and I was curious to see who would cover for her this time. As expected, this time it was her brother, Eric, who called me while still at work. A whole family in on it, huh? These ungrateful wretches, living off me, wearing what I provide, using what I give, and yet treating me this way. It's utterly disheartening. Ungrateful as they are, facing such a situation, I naturally couldn't refuse. I was waiting for the evidence of the affair to be sent to my phone by the lawyer, solid proof. My brother-in-law and his mother were cut from the same cloth, greedily taking advantage of me. I kept up appearances with Eric, maintaining my composure until I returned home at 2 a.m. My wife was already fast asleep, but the number above her head had changed from 4 to 7. Another 3 times, huh? At that moment, my phone buzzed with 2 files sent by the private detective, detailing the first and second instances of infidelity, filled with a stack of photos and several videos. Seeing the face of the man in the photos, I was slightly shocked, then a cold smile appeared on my face. It turned out to be you. No wonder you could bewitch my wife so thoroughly. Well then, prepare for my revenge. This man, named John, was a mid-level manager in my finance department, 4 years older than me. He was very handsome and had a lot of fans in the company. Originally, he was a hot candidate for the position of finance director. As long as he worked hard and made no mistakes, it wouldn't take many years for him to secure that position. However, he never anticipated that I, using my ability to see infidelity rates, would maneuver behind the scenes and directly oust the original finance director. With some leverage in my hands, I naturally snatched the position of finance director from him, becoming the only person in the company's history to become finance director at 25. Little did he know, he harbored resentment in his heart and targeted my wife, bringing me such a huge cuckoldry. I browsed through the first file, and as I suspected, Mary hadn't gone back to her mother's house at all, but went to a high-end couples hotel in the city with John, having a great time. Claiming she went back to her mother's was just an excuse for cover, having colluded with her mother early on. The second file confirmed she was at the same hotel today. Seeing her smiling and cooperative demeanor infuriated me, especially John's vindictive and triumphant expression. But for someone as ambitious as him, it wasn't just about making me a cuckold. Through the video recordings, I finally understood his motive. Mary, if you truly love me, help me with one thing. Steal your husband's security token for me. After I'm done, I'll return it. Once I take over the position of finance director, you'll control the household finances. Spend however you like, no more being kept by your heartless husband. receiving just a little allowance every month. Sure, dear. You're so good to me. I smirked coldly. He was after the U-disk, storing the company's financial data in my possession. With that U-disk, no matter how he manipulated it, it would make it impossible for me to stay in the company, potentially facing bankruptcy or even jail time. And Mary was foolish enough to be charmed by just a handsome face, utterly naive, being used as a pawn without realizing it. So, I decided to set a trap. While Mary was away, I secretly installed a camera in the room. For the first few days, there were no issues, but Mary's number gradually changed from 7 to 13. Until one weekend, Mary, thinking I was asleep, sneakily rifled through my briefcase. Finding the security token, she was secretly delighted and replaced it with a fake one in my briefcase. Without the surveillance, I would have truly believed her fake token was mine. After the security token was stolen, it took a day for her to return it to me, thinking she had covered her tracks perfectly. Little did she know, my surveillance had captured everything clearly. Checking the system, I found 20 million vanished, transferred to an overseas account. It seemed he wanted to create the illusion of me embezzling company funds. All right, if you want to play, I'll play along. Discovering the embezzlement would take time, and so far, there was no movement from John. But surprisingly, my mother-in-law and her family came directly to my house. My mother-in-law had not a hint of a smile, and my brother-in-law was engrossed in his phone the entire time. Seeing me, they didn't even greet me but walked straight into my house, took off their shoes, and lay on my sofa as if it were their own home. The strong foot odor made me frown. My mother-in-law was no different, sitting cross-legged on the sofa, then directly stated, "It's time for Eric and his girlfriend to get married. That girl is from the city. It's not like I can let them both live with me, an old lady, in the countryside. So, you need to fund a villa in the city for him, similar to yours, and a car. The dowry shouldn't be less than $500,000. Although Eric is working, the job you found him isn't great, just over $5,000 a month. He also needs to date his girlfriend and all, so he can't save much money. So, you need to take responsibility for all these." It's like she was giving me orders, not allowing me to refuse at all. Looking at her greedy face, I just coldly smiled. Ever since I married Mary, I've loved everything about her, sending many expensive gifts to her family during festivals. Now, I've also built them a house and found a job with a monthly income of over $5,000. Even bought Eric a car for commuting. I didn't expect that all these were still not enough, and they became greedier. Initially, for the sake of LV Shirhan, I didn't mind, as my capabilities were more than enough to support them. But now, they've teamed up to deceive me, wanting to squeeze more out of me. Even a lion doesn't open its mouth like that for a marriage. It costs so much money. My mother-in-law's face changed, and she angrily said, "Am I not making sense anymore? Now that you've achieved success, you're not willing to give this little amount of money to your brother-in-law?" As soon as the brother-in-law heard this, he was also displeased, his eyes full of disdain. "You're now a financial director, earning millions a year. Don't be so stingy." Mary also hurriedly said, "Yes, dear, with your capabilities, it won't take long to earn it all back. He's my only brother. Please do it for me." Faced with their greedy eyes, I only said 2 words, "No money." Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law directly smashed the teacup to pieces. "Is this the good husband you found? He doesn't even listen to me now. If I knew you were such an ungrateful wolf, I wouldn't have married Mary to you." Eric, with a face full of disgust and even hatred, looked at me. "David, you're not worthy of being my brother-in-law. A villa, a car, how much money can that take from you? I think you don't love my sister anymore." Mary looked at me pitifully, her eyes red, tears about to fall at any moment. In their eyes, over the years, I've been extremely generous to Mary's family, almost granting every request, thinking I absolutely adored her. They thought by using Mary, I would unconditionally agree to their demands. But they were wrong. In my heart, if someone is good to me, I'll be good to them. If someone wrongs me, I won't be soft-hearted. After all, as the old saying goes, how can one return kindness if one returns grievances with kindness? This has always been my philosophy. Since you're so greedy, then you must bear the consequences. Fine, I agree to your demands. Really? This is what you said. You can't go back on your word. The brother-in-law's eyes didn't hide his excitement. I nodded and smiled. Of course, it's true. You're my wife's brother, my brother-in-law. For her, I'm willing to do anything. Mary hugged me with a moved expression, but the 93% infidelity rate on her head didn't change at all, clearly pretending. My mother-in-law couldn't contain her joy, but still maintained a stern face, pretending to be authoritative. That's more like it. If you can't even do this, then don't be my son-in-law. Watching their greedy, gluttonous looks, I sneered in my heart, then showed a helpless, bitter smile on my face. It's just that there's been a small financial issue in the company, and I really can't get any money out right now. Eric's smile abruptly ceased, and in a fit of rage, he grabbed my collar. Are you messing with me? I hurriedly explained, No, no, no. You've got it all wrong. It's like this. There was indeed a small discrepancy in the company's accounts. To cover it, I've put in all the money I had. It will take at least a week before the finances can operate normally again. By then, not only will I be able to withdraw all my money, but there will also be a substantial bonus. Buying a villa and a car is just a drop in the bucket. So, what I mean is, apart from the dowry for the other things, you could cover the down payment for the car and villa you fancy. Once my money comes in, I'll immediately pay off the balance. How about that? Eric, after listening, felt it made sense. My mother-in-law said, but the down payment also requires a lot of money. We don't have that much money on us. I sneered inwardly, revealing my ultimate goal. Then there's nothing I can do. But you could take out a loan. There are so many online loans, and then there's bank mortgage loans and such. Mortgage the house to the bank. Use that money for the down payment. I'll pay off all the loans later. Anyone else would have realized there was something fishy, but not these greedy folks. They believed I couldn't live without Mary, and that with just a bit of manipulation, they could have me completely under their control, just like those internet sycophants who can't help themselves after getting a bit of sweetness and pine away after a bit of bitterness. They thought I was that kind of person because my actions over the years had been too similar. Seeing them agree, to prevent any changes, I took them to see the car and house immediately. Eric was extremely satisfied, but when he heard the salesperson say that someone else was very interested and had left a phone number to be contacted the next day as they might also want it, he panicked. Both the car and the house had grown on him aesthetically, so he was eager to take out a loan. Little did he know, the salesperson had been bought off by me. Following this, Eric and my mother-in-law frantically took out loans online, even not sparing those with a monthly interest rate of 10% in their view. Money that could be repaid in a week was no different from taking out a high-interest loan. After borrowing from high-interest lenders, they even wanted to mortgage the house and car, so they went directly to the bank. After scraping everything together, they finally managed to make the down payment. They were elated, not knowing that this was the beginning of their nightmare. The next day at work, John strutted up to me. I responded with confidence, John, no one has ever managed to snatch something from my grasp. You're the first to try. But soon, you'll be disappointed to learn that this position of finance director won't be yours, no matter what tricks you pull. His handsome face twisted into a snarl. David, it seems you still don't believe it. But whatever, we'll just wait and see. And I really have to thank your wife for this opportunity. It wasn't in vain that I exhausted all my techniques in bed, leaving her crying for her daddy and mommy. The taste of a finance director's wife is truly different. He was trying to get a rise out of me, to see some reaction on my face, but I remained calm, not even giving him a direct glance. This made him feel as if he was punching cotton, which infuriated him even more. At that moment, the boss convened all the senior executives for an emergency meeting. John burst into laughter, taunting, David, get ready to go to prison. Although I'm married, I'll take the time to look after your wife when you're gone. Entering the meeting room, the boss, upon seeing me, furiously threw a file in front of me and berated, David, can you explain to me why the company's financial backend is suddenly missing a whole $20 million? Everyone looked at me in shock. As the finance director, I had control over the company's finances, a privilege shared only with the boss, since only we knew the password to the security token that stored financial data. With such a large sum of money missing, it seemed evident that the finance director had embezzled 20 million. This was a serious crime. I calmly requested, "Boss, could you give me a moment to have a few people explain this situation on my behalf?" The boss, irate, responded, "I'd like to see who can clarify this. If you can't provide a satisfactory explanation, be prepared to face the law." After about 15 minutes, 4 or 5 police officers firmly apprehended John. "Mr. Braydon, you are under arrest for the alleged illegal embezzlement of a large sum of company funds and for framing others." The boss and everyone else were dumbfounded. Wasn't it David who embezzled the company funds? How did it turn out to be John? John was terrified, frantically trying to defend himself. "It wasn't me. It wasn't. It was David. David, you've got the wrong person. The security token has always been with him. Only he knows the password. I'm just a minor manager. How could I possibly embezzle the funds? And framing? It was him framing me, not the other way around. Officers, you must get this straight." I just smiled coldly. I pulled out a recording and played it. After listening, John's face turned ashen. I said in a low voice, "This isn't the only evidence I have. The rest I've sent to the police. The content is quite private, so I won't divulge too much here." I looked at John indifferently. "John, you thought you were foolproof, but you didn't realize that everything was under my control. Do you know what you are in my eyes? You're just a jumping clown, not worth mentioning. Let me tell you frankly, I've never taken you seriously as a competitor. You're not worthy. As for the public funds you embezzled, well, let's just say your family's assets can be confiscated to cover it." He was shaking all over, too scared to even stand, and was finally dragged away by the police, his expression one of utter despair. I turned to look at the boss with a half-smile. After everyone had left, I quietly approached him. "Boss, you wouldn't want your affair to be known by your wife and others, would you?" He looked at me as if he'd seen a ghost. Afterward, my position in the company became even more secure. With John's matter settled, it was time to deal with Mary. I hadn't exposed her earlier for fear of startling the snake. Now that John was in prison, I had no more concerns. I promptly sent Mary a court summons. Her face turned deathly pale upon receiving it. Her mother exploded in a thunderous rage, her face squeezing together as she stormed up to me and cursed. "You heartless scoundrel! What has her ever done to wrong you? To treat her like this? And to serve her divorce papers through the court? If you don't give me a reason, this isn't over," she said, raising her hand to slap me. I just smirked coldly and kicked her to the ground. She grimaced in pain, wailing on the floor. Mary rushed over in panic, while Eric seemed ready to fight me. Before he could make a move, I slapped him down too. Rubbing my hand, I said indifferently, "To be honest, I've disliked you all for a long time. If it weren't for the fact that you're Mary's mother and brother, do you think I would have shown you any mercy? Over the years, you've been greedy, taking advantage of me. You know exactly how much you've benefited. You call me heartless, a traitor, but honestly, you're worse." I turned to Mary. "To call our separation a divorce is almost too kind. It's more accurate to say I'm dumping you. Why? Because you've been unfaithful and even sided with your lover against me. I gave you one last chance 2 weeks ago. That was your final warning. Had you shown remorse, I might have let it go, even grown old with you. But you were blinded by lust and betrayed me." Mary's mother retorted loudly, "Nonsense. You must have someone else and concocted this whole scheme. Mary is kind and a perfect wife and mother. How could she be as you describe? Show us the evidence if you can." She was bluffing, hoping I had no proof. Without evidence, my accusations would be baseless. I smirked coldly. "You're pitifully stupid. If I had no evidence, would I sue in court?" I threw some photos at her face, explicit and damning. Mary had held a sliver of hope, but upon seeing the photos, she slumped to the ground in despair. Her mother, in a panic, crumpled the photos and stuffed them into her mouth, attempting to destroy the evidence. She thought the photos were all I had. Watching her struggle, I mocked. "Finished? I have more. Do you want them?" I pulled out a thick stack of photos. She was livid. After a long while, she finally said, "Fine. Mary, Get divorced then. We're not afraid of him. You're entitled to half his assets. With your looks, you'll surely find another wealthy husband. Eric said, Sister, don't be sad. Besides, he still owes the final payment for the villa and the car, as well as the loans. He hasn't paid them off for us yet. By that time, we will still be millionaires and don't have to rely on him. Mary also came to her senses when she heard this. That's right. His assets are marital property. I should have half of them. Besides, there are so many debts he hasn't paid for us. Why should we care about him? By then, with all that money, it wouldn't be a problem to find a golden bachelor, or even keep a young fresh meat. At that moment, she became arrogant, with the infidelity rate above her head flashing continuously. I was almost amused by their words. The final payment for the villa, the usury you borrowed. Why should I pay for the things you owe? Eric sneered. You said it yourself. You're not going to deny it, are you? I sneered. Oh, who can prove it for you? Whether it's a loan or a down payment, you were the one who received and paid for it in your name. It has nothing to do with me. Are you joking that I should pay it back? They then realized that I had tricked them. Mary's mother cursed, David, you bastard. I shook my head. That's no more bastard than you guys. Greedy guys like you deserve this. As for the property division issue, 99% of my property is premarital property. If you want to split half of the money, you're dreaming. The only thing you can split is half of that 1%. I've calculated it for you. It's probably just over 100,000. The money you have is probably not enough to pay off your usury. Ha ha ha. Mary's eyes were filled with disbelief, and her mother was so angry that her blood pressure soared and she passed out. Finally, the day of the court ruling came. With irrefutable evidence, Mary was forced to dissolve her marriage with me. As for the property issue, she only got half of my 1% of the property, because the rest was all premarital property. As for the down payment they borrowed from the loan shop, there was no direct evidence to prove that I needed to help them pay it back, so it was deemed invalid. They collapsed on the spot. After leaving the courtroom, Mary rushed over, clung to me tightly, tears streaming down her face. David, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was really wrong. I was just deceived by John's sweet talk. I just made a mistake that any woman would make. Please forgive me. Honey, I promise I will love you forever. I will be loyal to you forever. Whatever you ask me to do, I will do. I will never have contact with any other man besides you again. I looked at her coldly as the numbers above her head dropped rapidly. But none of that mattered anymore. This is a story of betrayal, regret, and ultimate justice. It's about a man who was deceived by his wife, Mary, and her family, who were only after his wealth. When he discovered his wife's infidelity and their schemes, he decided to leave them all behind. Despite their pleas for forgiveness, he remained firm in his decision. He watched as they fell into destitution, unable to pay back the debts they had accumulated while living lavishly on his money. Mary, once a beautiful woman, became a shadow of her former self, ragged and malnourished, living under a bridge and regretting her actions. Her mother died of a stroke, blaming her daughter with her last breath. As for the man, he moved on from this painful chapter of his life. He became successful in his career, even becoming the owner of a financial company, living a prosperous life without the people who had once betrayed him. This is a poignant tale reminding us of the consequences of greed and betrayal, and that there's no medicine for regret in this world.